Okay, so our next speaker is Stephen Hill from the University of Wolverhampton, and he's going to be talking about who removed his data. So thank you very much.
Right, I am Steve Hill. I'm the Information Security Project Manager at the University of Wolverhampton, and James, in his previous life, came to visit us about 2 years ago and set me on this journey. And when we spoke earlier, he said, how's it getting on? I said, it's been a bit of a challenging journey, but this is an explanation of what that involves. My director said to me, what are you going to talk about then, Steve? When you go stand on that stage, what are you going to say? I said, well, I thought I would do those 2 questions you asked me 2 years ago. The first one being, where's our data? And the second one being, what risks are there? And at that point, he went quiet, as directors do, went very quiet. And she said, I don't know how you're going to make that interesting. So with that motivational spirit, I was given that. So now I've now got a problem. I've got a subject which my director thinks I can't make very interesting. So I then thought, well, how am I going to make this interesting? 1998, those remember 1998. 1998 was a good and a bad year. Part good, you could say Helmut Kohl was the Chancellor of Germany, and we had Tony Blair. Okay. Titanic was released as a film, but also Shakespeare in Love. Yeah, okay, good and bad. But one of the biggest things was that Dr. Spencer Johnson, who you may not know, released a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And I thought, that's the vehicle for me. I can use that in this talk. Because A, it's an unusual title, and B, it's probably the only cheese-themed talk at UCISA today, and maybe in the history of UCISA. I don't know, maybe. So that's the theme of my talk. So it was who's moved my cheese, basically. We had a number of incidents where we realised that we thought we put data securely in certain locations, but users being users, they didn't like it being there. It was easy, moved it somewhere else, or they wanted to do different things with it, process it differently. So they kept moving the data out into the cloud. So, bless them. And these came about. We realised this when we went to look for our data, and it wasn't where we expected it to be, or something went wrong, and we suddenly realised that, hang on, who's authorised this data to be put in this location? I had that problem of trying to sort out what it looked like. So if anybody's come across Peter Checklin was a professor at Lancaster University, and he came up with a system of analysing complex problems called soft systems. And this is my take on what he did. And so if we start off with the basic question our Vice Chancellor was, what's going on? Where's the data? Where's it being moved? What is the risk? Okay. Well, number 2, I knew HR, finance, those sort of people. I knew they were sharing data, it was moved back and forth. So I could see it on the network, I could see it going through the firewalls, I could see what's going on. But the question to me was, number 3, what about everybody else? What's everybody else doing? So we started to think about what this process was. I had data classification in place, I had information security policy, everything that James had told me to do, I had done. Must be secure, good auditors. But we realised that shadow IT was a big problem for us. And when you look at Intel Security Report of 2016, you see that 40% of IT cloud services have been commissioned without IT being involved at all. That's true for us, at least 40%, I would say. So what do we do about those problems up there? So we started to have talks with people about research and the different faculties about, what are you doing with this data? Why are you moving it? What's going on? What can we do to help it? And people didn't understand why we were asking the questions. Well, why are you asking these questions? We've been doing this for years. No one's ever asked this question before. Why are you interested? So we then said, well, if we don't get this right, the ship's going to turn over one day because you're going to lose that data. Our reputation's going to go pear-shaped. We need to get to grips with this. And when we started to look at the problem a bit more, we realised what it was, and people have mentioned this before, is that ghost sharing, malicious outsiders, people creating servers and moving on was a problem, and setting up cloud services as and when needed. Now, this problem is not new. Bruce Schneider, who's been mentioned a couple of times here already, said back in 2013 that technical details are a bit of a problem. And when you talk to people, they go, I don't know about that techie stuff. All the techie people can go away. I've got a credit card. I've got some data. What's the problem? I'll just shift it across there. I don't want to know about the techie stuff or the security stuff. And so we were working within that problem. We then had the issue of, well, how are you going to do this, Steve? How are you going to work out where this data is? So I said, well, okay, I can draw this out. You know, get a bit of a pen. I can draw this out. It's pretty easy. It's not a big problem. You know, you can sort this quite easily. What we'll do is we'll have a look at a few models. So we'll look at NIST and we'll look at ISO and CSC, and then from that we'll be able to draw up some questions and ask people, what data have you got? Where is it? What are you doing with it? And maybe we've got somebody outside, some vendors, who could help us maybe. And then we've done all that. We can look at the problem, analyse it, and then we can discuss it, and we can find a way to improve the situation we're currently in. Yes, simple, very, very simple. That's what we'll do. So all we need to do is a bit of data discovery. That shouldn't take too long, 6 weeks maybe. Me and a pencil, would be no problem whatsoever. But then I started to discover that people didn't really know the term, what is sensitive data? And we hark back to this, other speakers have said this as well. Whenever a laptop is lost, and I go, is there any sensitive data on that laptop? People go, oh no sensitive data. Oh, there was nothing on there that anybody could particularly know. There was no sensitive data whatsoever. So I realised that probably people didn't actually know what sensitive data was. So the first thing we did was we actually came up with a list of what we thought should be sensitive data. So basically said to people, if you have any of this data, to us it is sensitive. Can you please tell us where you started putting this data? Is it in the cloud? Easy, simple question. Not too challenging. We then came across people going, well, why should we tell you? Who are you? Your IT services. Why are you asking these questions? This is my data. It belongs to me. It doesn't belong to you. I've been doing this for years. No one's had any interest in it. And suddenly you're turning up asking me to say, what is it? You know, clear off. Get off the grass. You know, it's nothing to do with you at all. So we had to overcome that problem. And basically what it boiled down to was that people were seeing this as being an auditor question. And as James knows, when auditors come, you don't tell them what the truth is, you tell them what you think they need to know. So you give the answer that you think they'll need. So we had to explain to people that we're not auditors, this is not an audit process, it's about understanding where our information is and what you've got there. So we had to overcome that small hurdle. What we ended up is we found that we had 192 different business systems in the university. Interesting enough, it quite surprised me really, because when you look at it, estates and facilities was one of the major people sharing data and moving it back into the cloud. Which quite stunned me really. So we've got 192 different systems, and at this point my director said, all right, Steve, you must have a business model in mind by now. You've done all this work, you've been looking at this, and you've got all this data. Have you got a model to describe the business systems, innovation systems? So, oh, yes, I have. I have a model. It's a fantastic model. It looks like this. So he goes, Steve, I'm starting to get a bit worried about you now for two reasons. The first one is that Wolverhampton seldom has a blue sky that colour once every 3 decades. And it's not quite the business model I was expecting you to show me about how these systems work. I went, okay, I'll go back to the drawing board. What I'll come up with a better model. I'll probably borrow one from somewhere. And what I used is the ISACA model for business elements. And what this basically does, it gives me a framework to look at the information systems. And for each of those elements, I go, right, what are the technology issues? What are the people issues? What are the process issues? What are the organisation issues? It gives me a bit of a framework to try to assess these information systems. But because that's quite simple, we have to add in some bits in the middle as well, which is the culture, the architecture, and the human factors. Over lunch I said, IT is fantastic if you didn't have people. People weren't involved. It's a really simple job. As soon as the human factors come in, it starts to become a bit more complicated. So we've now got a model which I can use to try to measure those information systems against. So what did it look like? Well, probably no news to you. What we found was that large, devolved organisations have different data standards. Each faculty, each department had their own standards. The university had developed a sort of tail-wagging dog approach in that I do this with my data, these are my standards, you'll have to meet our requirements. The basic bottom line was that we had to continue to remember that the purpose we were doing this was that data governance was a very important part for us. In that we were finding that if we were going for research data, we had to comply with partners' requirements, and that we had to comply with regulatory and statutory requirements as well. But we still had that turf war, people going, it's my data, it belongs to me, I don't know why you're doing this. So at this point, the director said, well, surely there's somebody out there that's done this before. There must be a vendor out there that's done this. There must be a product we can buy off the shelf, bring it in, plug it into the system, it'll do all this work for us. It'd be really simple. Somebody's bound to have done this before. I like this photo because A, salesmen are all wearing ties, which is a good one for me. And if you look at the picture in detail, you'll see they're all ranged in height. It's a company that pays attention to detail. So we went out to the vendors and we asked them to come along. We explained that we wanted to know where our data was, how much it was at risk, and how they could help us to actually discover where this data was. And because I lived the dream, I spent about 3 months listening to vendors and their different products and how they were going to do this and how they were going to collect the data for me. And at which point, our executive said, whoa, hang on a minute. Let's just have a look at this again. What are we actually trying to work out? What are we trying to do here? We've got all these vendors coming in so they can do these magic things. But what are we actually trying to do? I said, well, I've looked at lots of different products. I've looked at lots of different vendors. And they basically break down into 4 different areas. You've got the one area, number 1 over here, who've got a magic technology, which they just want to plug into our network, which takes no relation of any of the people factors or the organisation. You've got number 2, who go, oh yeah, we've got a bit of technology, but we're going to realise you're a complex organisation, we can cater for that. That's not a problem at all. We've got the group number 3, which is saying, we've got technology, and we look at your bit of governance, and we can solve the problem. No problem at all. Very, very rare, nearly as rare as unicorns, are the group number 4, which are the vendors which say, we've got the technology, we understand it's a complex situation, we need to look at the culture, we need to look at the people, and we need to look at the governance. Those are very, very rare vendors, in my experience. So, at that point, we said, okay, right, so we've got some ideas, we've got some vendors out there who could possibly do this for us. We'll go ahead and do it now. We've got a vendor, we've got money, we've got determination, we've got standards to hit. Let's go and do it. At this point, the directors said, whoa, hang on. We're not quite sure about this. What are you trying to do? What's the cost? Well, you're trying to do this. We don't like spending money. What's the cost? And the one that really struck me, which comes about quite often when you have conversations with the great and the good, is that the question comes, well, we've never actually addressed this problem before. If we don't address it now, surely it won't be a problem in the future. We just ignore it, it'll just go away. Because no one's actually lifted that stone. James has come in, he hasn't found that stone yet. Why are we looking at it? Why don't we just leave it where it is? Okay. Well, what should we do then? Well, what we think we should do, we think that the vendors are, it's going to be very slow. We want this to do in 6 weeks, and they're talking about 6 months. Okay. They're going to charge us an awful lot of money for doing this piece of work. Yes. And we don't really think it's going to be very efficient. Okay. What do you want me to do instead? Well, what we would like you to do is to do something that's quick, simple, effective, and what should on the bottom there is, and cheap. If you can do that, it'd be fantastic. Having listened to what's been going on and actually paying attention, I realised that I'd had to prepare for this. And we also actually noticed there were changes in the director's attitude to this piece of work. So we actually started to prepare to tackle these problems. And I came up with, okay, there's 3 ways you can do this. You can do it top down, you can do it bottom up, and you can always use technology. 3 ways, okay? Top down, start with top down. Let's talk to the data owners, data custodians, data stewards. What systems have you got? What data is it sharing? Don't really know. Maybe we need to talk to one of our techie people. Yeah, not quite sure about how that works. We've got 192 systems, yes, we know that. We're not quite sure. Okay, maybe you should do it from bottom up. Okay, we'll do bottom up instead. We'll do that instead. Right, let's try bottom up. Let's get everybody in a workshop. Let's talk to them. Let's do it bottom up and see how many systems we've got there. Oh yeah, we had 192 systems. We've now got 560 systems. This is not working very well, is it really? Okay, what we'll do is we'll do a firewall. We'll stick some magic boxes on, and we'll do SSL, and we'll see what sort of data's been moved around the network. Yeah, okay, right. We're still no better off. We've still got 560 different systems, and we need some way, because there's only you and a pencil. We need some way of trying to identify risk. So I thought about this, and I thought, well, how can we identify risk? Let's sort of think about this one. There must be a way. Why don't we use the artifacts we've got already in place? We had 14 different sort of artifacts. So we've got things like information asset inventories. We've got some previous pen tests. We've got vulnerability tests. We've got audit reports. Audit reports says you need to do this. So if we find these 14 different documents, we could probably start to do a risk assessment. So from those 560 systems, we looked at those 14 different artifacts to try to identify high risk. Now, we can identify high risk, we can identify cloud services, but we still haven't solved the problem of what do we do with those cloud services once we've identified them? What are we trying to answer? Well, what we're trying to answer is, who's got access to that data? Where is it stored? How secure is that data once it's stored in there? What checks have been made about the security in place? Is it encrypted? Is it a long-time and viable solution, or is somebody going to go bankrupt in about 2 weeks' time? We have to move our data somewhere else. And if we do move our data somewhere else, how are we going to get the data back to move it to another supplier? So what we did was we came up with the BMS, the business model, and we used the process there to ask questions of the cloud suppliers. And we divided this into 2 different separate questions. When I first did it, I started off with about a 40-page document, which had all the technical questions about, is it encrypted, is it multi-tenancy, and what I found is that a lot of people who were actually signing up for cloud services couldn't answer the technical questions. So we went back to simplify those questions and divide them in 2. The first part would be purely about the system, and the second part would be purely about the contract. So we divided it into 2 questions, 2 set of questions, and for each cloud service we said, right, here's the questions about the system. Is it encrypted? Where's it kept? How's it kept? What's our service level agreements? And for the contracts, we said, right, here's a contract. How long is it binding for? How can we get out of it if we need to get out of it? What sort of notifications do we have to do? And so use those 2 systems based on our existing business model to try to evaluate our cloud services. Now the question is, what did we learn from doing all that? Well, what we learned was that this is quite a complex situation. It's not a problem that you can solve and just move on. So you go, I've done this once, problem solved, let's move on. It's a problematic situation in that you have to keep going back to it in an iterative process. And you have to try to work out where the best place to start from. You have to build collaborations between the business units and IT services, and that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. You can use external consultants, but external consultants are quite variable in quality. Some are good and some are not so good. And you have to make sure they've got the resources to actually do this complex piece of work. They also need to be able to show that they can mitigate against data defense tactics. So they have to be able to show they can collect the data, they've got the resources to do it, bring it together into one package for you. You can present to your management team to understand the problem. Overall, what do we find? Well, if you don't change, then you become extinct. The reasons why information was moved out into the cloud, there's two basic fundamental problems. The first one is either a business problem, and they wanted to do something and they hadn't got the resources to do it within the university, or it was a money problem, as in they wanted to reduce cost. So overall, what we can say is that moving information to the cloud is commonplace. Trying to find out where your data is being moved to is quite complex, and that you need to revisit the problem repeatedly to actually identify where those issues are. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much.